Hey everyone,
This is Jason and Josh
from the Gaming Manual, and we're back with another episode
of The Good,
The Bad,
and The Buggy.
just in time for Halloween. Today, we're taking a look at A Nightmare on Elm Street.
For the NES.
A Nightmare on Elm Street was developed by Rare and published by LJN in October 1990. In it, you play as one of the 4 Elm Street teens, whom are all ordinary teenagers with extraordinary problems. Hey, those are the manual's words, not mine. With the aid of several Dream Warrior icons, the players can each transform into one of several Dream Warriors. They are as follows. Shadow Warrior, a martial arts master able to deliver lightning-fast attacks which leave devastating effects. The Acrobat. Using a stunning array of acrobatic maneuvers, this athlete knows exactly what to do to stay out of harm's way. The Necromancer. A magician character that can conjure up energies and channel them in superhuman ways. You'll also need to use these cool items like coffee and a radio to help you ward off Freddy Krueger. I wonder how Freddy likes his coffee. And spooky, that's how. You'll need to use every special ability and power-up that you can muster in order to defeat Freddy and his band of ghouls. I mean, just look at these ghouls. Alright, are you ready, kids? Let's dive in. The Good. Controls and platforming.
The controls for Nightmare on Elm Street are surprisingly good and have aged well in my opinion. At first, it might feel a little floaty, but after a few jumps you'll realize what they were going for, and they're trying to give you a little extra time to adjust to avoid landing on enemies. In comparison to other platformers, your fall is slightly slower, but not anything that I find detrimental to the gameplay itself. The attacks feel tight and accurate, but they do have a slight delay between them. So, if you're just spamming the attack without timing them correctly, you could end up taking a hit from an enemy.
I remember getting this game at, you guessed it, Funko Land, sometime in the late 90s. I'm pretty confident I paid a whole $4.99 for it. What makes A Nightmare on Elm Street on the Nintendo Entertainment System so special is that it's one of the few 4-player titles. Because of this, I also remember digging in the infamous miscellaneous bin around the same time and finding the NES 4-score. I later found the NES Satellite, and I do actually remember using it quite frequently to play this game. I was in grade school at the time, and it was next level to be playing NES wirelessly across your bedroom on your ancient CRT TV. Music and visuals.
They did a good job capturing the feeling of the movie in concept, not so much in the execution. The music is great, with lots of recognizable tunes, and the radio, which has the most intense headbanging music. Too bad it only lasts for a few seconds. The level design is basic, but not frustrating. A perfect example of this is as they don't go overboard with the layout and keep it simple enough that anyone could play it. But they do add in a couple of those classic NES jumps, just to make it a little bit more challenging.
Just for reference, this game was released in 1990, which is typically considered the peak of the Nightmare on Elm Street merchandising cash-in. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. Get that money, Freddy. The reason I bring this up is just like with Jason and Friday the 13th, Freddy and A Nightmare on Elm Street got their turn to shine on the NES as well. Freddy was everywhere in 1989 and 1990, and the NES was no exception.
I personally find the Dream Tokens and powers in the Dream World to be a lot of fun to use, as it adds a nice variance and a good change of pace for the game. The enemies are harder to defeat when you're in the Dream World, and if you stay asleep for too long, you'll end up having to fight Freddy, which I think is a clever way to have a time limit without an actual timer.
Now, Freddy can be a pain or he can be a total breeze, depending on the skill level of the player. I always found the different manifestations of Freddy to be both fun and funny. Look at this. This is the most Nintendo-ified thing ever. Gloves, tongues, etc. I'll always love how literal developers took things when crafting these games. This isn't a complaint. I'm thankful for all of this. The campier, the better. The bad. The bosses.
Freddy sucks. The bosses are very easy and straightforward. Unfortunately, there's not much of a challenge in the actual fights themselves. The biggest risk during the boss fight is actually boredom. If you lose focus, or not paying attention to the direction, you might end up taking a hit that you didn't need to take. For the first two bosses, you'll have to use the Acrobat Dream Token. All you have to do is duck and throw in the corner until it's defeated. But after that, you'll have the Shadow Warrior and can attack by jumping. You can also throw for a ranged attack. This gives you a little bit more options, but still boring, as the enemies again are just bouncing around. As stated earlier, there is a Necromancer. Unless you have a Death Wish, you are better off just sticking with the other two. While it does have a long-range projectile, it somehow still feels like you're moving slower than the other two. Ultimately, you are better off just sticking with the Shadow Warrior. The last thing I want to mention about the bosses is that none of them actually use the full amount of the boss meter. You'll notice on the top that there is a bar to indicate the boss's health, but none of the bosses, not even the final confrontation against Freddy, uses the whole bar.
You know, I've always found the bosses in this game both boring and kind of annoying. They just loop after a point and don't really add to the game's overall challenge. I mean, sure, they get faster, but that doesn't really make up for the lack of variation in the overall boss design, in my opinion.
There is also no health recovery in this game, which I think is fine since the way they handle death is very forgiving. Including from a continue. You start near where you died, and you get to keep all of the dream tokens that you've collected. So really, you only need to collect each token once. The game does have a nice arcade feel to it, but it would be better if I didn't have to keep track of my own hit points mentally, as sometimes I'll forget or miscount, and end up taking a hit that I didn't think would lead to a death.
Yeah, it's just like my sister. She makes a killing down in Jersey. Well, if it's anything like this game, that sounds both violent and dangerous. Yeah, it's wicked as hell, but no one cares because it's Jersey.
As I said before, the main street, Elm Street, where you start, is actually kind of like a hub, and it acts like a level selector, which actually slows down the platforming. I have no issue getting through most of the game without going into the dream world, but I often end up in the dream world in the junkyard and Freddy's house because I spend so much of my time that the sleep meter is only half filled by the time I get to the level itself. If there's one thing I would have changed in this game, it would have been this. You definitely need to be able to see how many hits you have, as well as just having the levels played back to back. Adding in the Elm Street is actually what hurts the game for the most part. I know it's the name of the game and the movie that it's based on. Really, there's no need then to add any of this except as extra padding, which slows down the game.
The Buggy. Hit detection. Remember earlier when I said Freddy and his minions can either be a pain or a breeze? Well, that's mostly due to this game's sometimes wonky hit detection. This drove me crazy as a kid, and I'd often make serious progress in the game only to get taken out by some inconsistent hit detection. This isn't an excuse, either. Go back and replay this game on any console that you can find it for.
Hit detection can only be described as wonky. Sometimes you'll fall through a platform that you swear you clearly landed on, or other times you might take a hit, even when you're using the Shadow Warrior's jump kick, which should provide some frames of invincibility. There isn't much that can be done about this, however, I felt that if the game focused more on the boss fights, this would have naturally resolved itself, as that's where I find most of the issues taking place.
Dream powers.
I experienced an issue in Freddy's house, where I was not able to proceed further into the level until I pressed the select button and went back to the default character, with no dream power. Only then was I able to proceed on to the next area. There was also this one area in the first level That maybe the game didn't expect you to be in the dream world, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it using the acrobat. It was only once I switched back to the default, no powers, I was able to collect this bone. I'm not sure how well known this is, but it does seem like there is some hit detection when it comes to collecting these bones.
The sleep meter.
When you're standing still, the sleep meter drains too fast, and you have to keep jumping or rocking the D-pad to avoid losing sleep. And when you're waiting for an enemy to move or a platform to come into position, it can be a little annoying, if not stressful. I know it was programmed this way, but I think of it as a bug because there's no leeway at all. It seems that as soon as you stop providing an input, the sleep meter speeds up, which feels a little out of place because that means you really can't just stand around waiting for a platform to get into a better position, but there's nowhere else for you to go. This can lead to you making missed jumps or taking some hits because now you're more focused or more stressed out from having to worry about the sleep meter, when really, you shouldn't have to worry too much, as you do get a fair amount of time. I do wish they had a better indication as to how much sleep you're losing.
I can only speak for myself here, but I feel like this game is aged very well compared to a lot of what's in the NES library, let alone for licensed IP stuff. I have a lot of personal nostalgic memories with this one, and I gladly fire it up every once in a while. I'd easily put A Nightmare on Elm Street in the must-play pile.
This is Jason and Josh.
From the Gaming Manual. If you liked what you saw, please hit the subscribe and like button if you haven't already. Let us know your opinion on A Nightmare on Elm Street in the comments below. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you in the next video. It's Super Freddy.
And he super sucks. Can you try that one again?